everyone. I'm Laura Northridge from Perkins School for the Blind. It's my pleasure to welcome you to our webinar, Skills for Social Success, our 9th installment in our Learning with Blindness series. These webinars look at each of the components of the expanded core curriculum. Our hope is to help your child become more independent and to help you advocate for your child's needs. I'm excited to welcome everyone here today. We have people from DC, Massachusetts, Pennsylvania, Colorado, as well as other countries. We have parents of toddlers to young adults, as well as educators and professionals from the industry joining us. This webinar will run approximately 60 minutes, with 45 minutes for our presentation, at which point we'll stop and give you time for questions for the last 15 minutes. We encourage you to ask questions throughout the webinar as they occur to you in the chat window. You'll have to log in using your Google account. If you prefer not to use your Google account, you can email me directly at laura.northridge@perkins.org. We'll address all questions at the end. This event is being recorded, and a link to the recording will be emailed to you, and it will be available on Perkins' website. We will also be emailing you a copy of the PowerPoint presentation. It's my pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Jeff Migliozzi. Jeff has taught English, media, and sex education in our high school program for 17 years. In addition, he hosts the Blind on Blind podcast for Perkins Radio. Jeff has been legally blind since birth. He first came to Perkins in 1984 to work in the Adult Services program, providing direct care to adults with multiple disabilities, before becoming director of that program for 11 years. Jeff received his bachelor's degree from Uppsala College and his master's degree in language and reading from Boston University and education of the visually impaired from Boston College. Thank you for joining us for our webinar, Skills for Social Success. Jeff, let's begin.
Thank you, Laura. And just for a little background, additional background, the first thing I really want people to realize is that it is never too early to work on social skills, and it's never too late. And that there is no one set formula. There's no one way that you're going to teach your child to do these things. Depending on your child's visual acuity, background, situation, things will vary. So what I'm hoping to do here today is to give you some ideas, some things to think about, and then for you to, carry on and continue the conversation. So, having said that, I'd like to begin with a story which might kind of help put in perspective how we go about teaching here at Perkins. So it was about 15 years ago, and I was invited to what was then the infant toddler program to come down and talk to some parents who had just found out that their babies were diagnosed with some form of visual disability. And so what they wanted to do was to see some adults who had been, grew up blind, living with blindness, and, to kind of hear our story. So we went down, and it was very nice, and there was about 4 of us, and we talked about what it was like going to school and college and marriage and raising children. And it was very nice. And at the end, one of the mothers stood up. She seemed very young to me. And she started to get choked up, and she said, I just want to know that my child is going to be loved. And everybody got quiet, and it was very poignant. And then, we said something along the lines of, well, there's no guarantees in life, but as you can tell from all of us here, we've managed to do okay. And really, when it comes down to it, blindness isn't going to stop you from, having relationships. And I was pretty proud of myself, and I went back and I did what I often did back then when, I had an event I wanted to process. I called my dear friend Linda Perel. Linda was a social worker in the lower school program at the time. She was blind from birth, raised 2 children, and so she is somebody that I've always looked to for insight. And so I told her the story, and I was waiting for her approval, and the phone was quiet. And then I heard Linda go, well, that's not really the question, is it? And of course I'm like, it's not, no, of course not, no, what's the question? And she said, really the question the mother should be asking is, will my child be able to love? And Linda went on to say that as a parent, she has no way of controlling, the events that her child is going to experience. She has no idea what the world is going to be like in 20 years, and what kind of jobs they're going to be, and who the people are going to be in her life, his or her life, where they're going to live. What she can control is what they learn now. And on top of that, she can model for her child what it is to give love and what it is to receive love. And once she said that, it just clicked with me that that's exactly what we're trying to do. So much of education around disability is about, adapting and society understanding and all these other things, and that's important. But when it really comes down to it, it's up to the individual to be able to advocate for themselves, to access the world around them, to make these connections, and to really be a reasonable human being in the world. I mean, that's really what we're striving for. And so social skills are the tools we use to build those communities. And so it really has to start with the individual. We can help model it, but it's really up to them. So that's what I really want you to think about, is ways in which you can help bring out those skills in your children, in your students. So.
Great, thanks, Jeff. Let's
Sure.
get a little more specific. Can
Sure.
you give us some examples of social skills that you're going to be talking about?
Sure. So a big issue, and a term you're going to hear me use a lot, is the term reciprocity. Now, reciprocity is a term that is often used by speech people, and it refers to when somebody says to you, "Hi, Jeff, how are you doing today?" Your normal response is, "I'm doing fine, Laura, how are you?" Right? Now, that may seem like a very simple thing, but what you've done there is a few things. You've established a kind of balance. Laura had said hello to me, she extended herself, she had shown concern, I acknowledged her concern, and I responded back to her with equal concern. So there's a real balance there. Think about what happens when somebody doesn't do that. All right? You say to somebody, "Hey, Laura, how are you doing today?" And they go, "Fine." And they keep walking. Well, then you start to wonder, is there something wrong? Is she okay? Or did I misspeak? Or is there a problem? And because there's a sense of imbalance. So again, that's a small thing, but yet when you look at the bigger picture, it's that kind of connection, it's that kind of relationship that helps us be, in community with each other. And in special education, we talk a lot about independence, dressing yourself independently, showering independently, brushing your teeth independently, cooking independently. But really in the world, we are independent, we are interdependent creatures, right? We love being able to, have our friends and family and people around us and business associates and our favorite plumber or our favorite auto mechanic to call when there's a problem, because not everybody can do everything. So most people live in the world in an interdependent manner. We rely on each other. We all have strengths, we all have limitations, and we rely on each other. The only truly independent people are those dudes in the bunkers in Montana who are like waiting for the zombie apocalypse or something, living off the land. Those are the only independent people. The rest of us really like to be interdependent. We really rely on each other. And so social skills help us make those connections.
Great. So what is self-management, and how does that relate to social skills?
Okay, so self-management is really talking about how you react to a situation. So, somebody comes in and says, gee, I'm sorry, but the meeting is, we're going to be a couple of minutes late. Somebody's in traffic, and we're going to have to wait a little bit. And the normal response is, you might be a little annoyed, but you would just say, okay, fine. You wouldn't be like, I can't wait! And you don't start screaming and getting upset, right? Because that would be overreacting to the situation. So when we talk about management, we talk about meeting the social situation with the appropriate response. So, not too aggressive, not too understated, but just just what's appropriate to that situation.
Great. So how do social skills help children maintain positive relationships?
Okay, so go back to the idea of turn-taking, sharing, that sense of balance, that when you're in a relationship, you're giving something of yourself and you're receiving something of the other person, and it feels good, it feels balanced, it feels like you're sharing something. And then think about when you have a relationship where that doesn't feel that way. You feel like you're the one that's always giving and they're always taking. That doesn't feel good. It feels off balance. And so our students, our children with disabilities are often used to having people going out of the way to give them more attention, be ready to kind of respond to any need they have. And what can happen is they can not really learn how to reciprocate. Again, going back to that word reciprocity. They don't understand that they have something to offer as well. And after a while, if they don't respond, people are going to feel drained by working with them, being around them. And we don't want our students being in that situation, right? We don't want them, we have some students here at Perkins, for example, who have lots of physical disabilities that really need a lot of attention. And you'd be surprised how much just a thank you or a please goes towards, helping them in their relationship with the caregivers.
Great.
So I think that's really important.
Great. So how do social skills help a child adjust to the classroom?
So let's take a step back for 1 second. It's a really good question. So why are, a lot of our, we talk about inclusion, right? We talk about the inclusion movement, that it's really important for our students with disabilities to be included in their regular school surroundings and, day, living in their communities. And the reason we want people to be included is because they get all the benefits of being in a regular school setting. So they get to be with peers, they get to learn about the latest trends, they get to share their concerns, their interests, they're getting exposed to the same curriculum, they're being included in the world that their neighbors are included in, that their peers are included in. So that's why we want to have inclusion. Inclusion is designed to serve education. Kids are going to learn in the school and they're going to be included in the school. So what often happens with our students is they get pulled out a lot of classes for things like mobility training or maybe Braille instruction or some specialized instruction. So maybe they're not always in the classroom. So part of these social skills are how they can kind of, when they're back in class, how they can talk to their classmates and get caught up. What have they missed? What's going on? Plus what they can talk about during recess, what they can talk about at lunch, so they can catch up socially, find out what's going on, find out what people are doing, what they're listening to, what's interesting them. So really that ability to kind of be in that class and to really truly access what everybody else is getting, that's what inclusion is all about. So if you want your child to be included, you want them to have the skills so they're able to maintain those relationships and learn from their peers.
Great. And how do social skills help children cope with their environment?
Well, think about, for example, with a disability, often you have to ask for maybe something extra or something explained that's different, or how to locate. I mean, you may know one route in your neighborhood, but now all of a sudden you need to find out where the mailbox is. You never learned that. So being able to ask people for assistance, being able to advocate for yourself, all that comes under social skills. I mean, these are things that help us access that kind of information and adjust to the environment around us.
Great. And so how do children learn social skills?
So, there is some direct instruction that goes on with social skills. I mean, we've all had our parents who, taught, table manners and please and thank yous. But that's really a very, very, very small part. Typically, we learn most of our social skills from observing the world around us and watching how other people do it. And you sort of see how your parents behave when they have friends over. You see how they dress when they're in the house versus how they dress when they're outside the house. You know who they're close to by the way that they greet them. You know who that they don't know very well by the position they stand in, and how far back they are, that kind of thing. So that's how most of us learn social skills, is by observing. If you're blind or visually impaired, you don't have that sense. So some of that information has to be spelled out directly to you. And that goes back to the whole expanded core curriculum. That's what the ECC is about. It's about those areas that have to be taught directly. And so, other students learn by just observing. Our students might have to be, given some direct instruction.
Great. So let's talk a little bit more about social skills for the child who's blind. How do you teach children that can't visually observe the behavior of other people how to react to and understand that behavior?
Okay, so there's a number of things you can do, and one is directly describing it. So telling them about what's going on around them. And this is where, one of the things that I love to teach is media. And here at Perkins, we teach a film class. And along with the description of the story, what's going on the screen, and talking about the camera angles and what the director is doing. It's also a great opportunity to talk about how people are communicating on screen. So waving, winking. Winking's a big one. I love to talk about winking because that's such a visual thing. And what does it mean? So those kinds of things. So if you're watching a movie with your child and you see something that's a visual social cue, a wave or whatever, to take some time and sort of explain that to them and tell them this is why they're doing it and this is what happened, and maybe even modeling for them how to do it. So so those kinds of things is one way you can help. We have social skill groups where we actually practice these things. Here at Perkins, we have lunch in the cottage, and that's a great time to talk about things like passing food around and pouring and cleaning up after yourself and those kinds of things. So there's lots of ways in which we teach and reinforce social skills.
Great. So what happens if you have a child who can't see people's reactions? How can you help children understand how to react and what's an appropriate reaction?
So some of that is things like tone of voice. So listening for the tone of voice. Do they sound happy? Do they sound angry? Do they sound friendly? Do they sound like they're not very forthcoming with the information? Other sounds, are they groaning? Are they whistling? Are they doing things that give you the impression that they're not really paying attention to you? Those kinds of things. So, to find other ways to read the situation. And then, some of the other things like just in terms of speech, just checking in, asking them like, hey, did what I just say make sense? Or, something just to kind of get a gauge, just to get a reaction from them. So, those are some of the ways that we teach them.
Great. So how can parents help children understand what to do in these situations?
Again, talk to them directly. I go back to television and film again because one of the things that's nice about film is that you don't have to talk directly to the student about their behavior, to your child about his or her behavior. You can say, did you see that girl in that movie? Did you see what she was doing? Did you see how she was talking to her mother? Did you see how, and you can describe that. And so now there's a third party involved. So you're not, the kid doesn't feel like he's under the microscope. It's somebody else, but that they're learning incidentally from that. And, a lot of times your child, your student might react like, oh, I don't really care about that. But what we find is that if you talk to them about it, they'll think about it, and then later on in their own social situations, they'll have something they can draw upon. And go like, oh yeah, I remember when they mentioned that to me, that kind of thing.
So how do you help children who are blind stay current with their peers with trends from movies, TVs, or clothing?
So obviously, a lot of that they can get on their own in terms of things like music, because all our kids listen to the radio, and they have internet, YouTube videos, that kind of stuff. Movies, generally speaking, our students are on top of the trends in movies as well. But really, the one area that you've mentioned that's the hardest for them are things like clothing. And this is something where particularly it's really important for me to talk to parents about, because we all know the classic situation of, you're not going to go out dressed like that, right? We've all had the situation where parents have one idea about what is a suitable something to wear, and teenagers have a very different idea of what's something suitable to wear. And I don't dishonor that relationship. Parents always have the ultimate right to make those decisions for their children. But what I always encourage parents to do is to not take advantage of the fact that their children can't see around them, and therefore use that to guide their tastes and what they're going to wear. Because if they're not wearing the clothes that the kids around them are wearing, they're going to stand out like a sore thumb. And they might not understand why, but the kids around them do. So things that they can do, certainly you can read teen magazines and see what the fashions are. But also if there are siblings in the house, that can kind of help when you go shopping. If you've got friends, as parents, if you've got friends who have children around the same age who are shopping, enlist them, help them, and try to find a balance between what you think is, what you're comfortable with, and what is going to make the child look, more current. But again, this goes back to what I said earlier. It's really more about just the thinking of it. The more you pay attention and realize that these social skills are very important, that these are the skills that our children are going to need, to live a full life. If you start sort of paying attention to that and giving value to that and giving weight to that, I think you'll be able to figure out on your own like the best ways to kind of get this information to them. It's really thinking about it in the first place, because as I like to say to parents, if everything goes according to plan, our children are going to outlive us. So there's going to be a time in their life when they're going to have to be doing these things on their own. They're going to be having to make friends and make connections and have business arrangements and work with people who are providing services for them. And so we need to give them the tools now so that they'll have them later when we're not around to help them.
Great. And so as a teacher here at Perkins, how do you incorporate social skills into the daily curriculum?
So we do it all the time, and I think this is one of the benefits. If you're working in an environment that's geared for the blind, is that we are constantly thinking about what are they going to get from that situation, what are they not going to get from that situation. So if you're reading a story in literature and it mentions clouds, well, we might have to stop and talk about what those things are, what clouds are, and try to give them a sense of what because you can't feel a cloud, and so you have to describe it to them. So in the same way with social skills. So if there's a description of a way a character is dressed, and that's significant, we point that out and we say like why the clothing would suggest that this person is dangerous, or this person is rich, or this person is poor, and to talk about that and then relate it to the way that we dress. If we're watching again a film, doing the same thing, talking about the nonverbal communication that goes on. To be honest, I do a lot of my my social skill teaching around the sex ed stuff, because so much around sex ed is nonverbal, and so it really is whenever you have an opportunity to be able to say like that's something a blind person may not really understand because they can't see it. Here's a good opportunity for me to talk to them and to build a lesson around it.
So we've talked a little bit about reciprocity already, but why is it challenging for children who are blind, and why is it so important?
And this is another one of those things that is a mindset that you really need to keep in mind. Going back to the idea of balance and giving and receiving sort of equally, that what happens with children with disability is that they are often the center of attention. And everybody is willing to give them, to take care of them. And they don't always expect the same in return because, well, they're disabled. They have problems. They have, this is the way people think. And so they end up overdoing it. We end up over-catering, and we don't expect that child to respond or to reciprocate. And what can happen in that situation is something that I refer to as the narcissism of disability. People who only take, and people who see themselves as the center of the universe and who don't give in response, we don't really tend to like those people very much. We get sort of tired of them pretty easily. But it can happen with a child who's disabled because everybody is so eager to overcompensate and to overly help that the child never gets an opportunity to test these skills out for themselves, and so they come to expect that the world is going to sort of take care of them. And as I said earlier, that's not the plan, and if we're not there to help them get taken care of, they need to be able to take care of themselves. So this is a real danger. So that concept of the narcissism of disability is something I'd really like you to keep in mind, that it's a learned narcissism, and our job is to not have them learn that.
So how do you teach children who are blind to initiate social interactions, and why is it important for them to initiate them?
Well, first of all, think about initiation. It means that you have something to say, that you have something to project out into the world. And so we want our students to have that sense. We want our students to be able to say like, I've got something to contribute here. I've got something to offer. And so conversation starters, finding ways to, when you meet somebody, again, practicing like, what would you say to somebody when you first meet them? If there's a girl you're interested in, what might you say to her? Those kinds of things to get them to start. So the people around them, first of all, see them as interacting, that these are people who are, just like me. They're here, they're in the classroom, they're in the workplace, they're striking up conversations, they're showing interest in me. Those are all really important, positive things. So helping our students think about like what's a good way to introduce yourself if you're meeting a stranger or, in a new social situation. We'll even rehearse sometimes, job interviews, those kinds of things. But just ways of getting conversations started, something. If there's music on, maybe, mention something about the music. Or if, the Red Sox are on a winning streak, maybe bring up the Red Sox. Or something that's going on that can just break the ice and let the other people around you know that, like, oh, this person's interested, this person's engaged in the world, and I'm going to respond to them.
Great. So let's talk about eye contact. Why is it important, and how can you help teach a child who is blind to maintain eye contact?
So eye contact is something that sighted people really rely on, because first of all, somebody looking straight at you into your eyes tells you that you've got their undivided attention. And that they're connecting directly with you. And just think about it in your own life. If you're talking to somebody and they're always looking off to the side or around or down, you're going to think like, gee, this person's really not that interested in me. They're really more interested in what else is going on, or they're looking for somebody else, or they're looking past me. So that eye contact makes you feel like you've got this person's, sole attention. So think about in a job interview how important that is, to make that eye contact. A secondary issue here that's relatively new, but we've noticed over the last 10 or 15 years, is that as more and more people understand about autism in the general population, well, one of the things that people know about autistic people is they have a very hard time making eye contact. And I've had a number of students tell me in the last few years that people thought that they were autistic because they weren't making eye contact because they're visually impaired. Now, how to teach that? Well, there's a couple of things. One is, first of all, from a very early age, we have to be encouraging our students to, first of all, face the speaker. So who's ever talking, to face them. Now, to the blind child, the child who is blind, that doesn't really matter because they have the hearing and they can hear what they're saying. So looking at them isn't essential to get the information, but what it does do is it tells the person speaking that you're paying attention. It makes them feel comfortable. And, a big part of social skills is really making other people feel at ease with you, and especially if you have a disability, because people are not always comfortable around somebody with a disability. Blindness is a very low incidence group. Really, there's lots of people, most people have never met a blind person. My parents never met a blind person until I was born. And so they had nothing to compare it to. So you don't want to add to that sense of awkwardness. You want to be able to convey the message that I'm like everybody else. And so something like eye contact really reinforces that. How you teach it, again, depending on how much vision the student has, if they face the speaker, if they have enough vision, like I could tell, like the hairline from the forehead, if they can tell that, then they can kind of go, look a little bit below the forehead and try to make eye contact that way. We also talk about if you hear the voice, to just kind of face the voice and maybe look up just a notch above the mouth to kind of get eye contact. But the most important thing is that you're trying and that you're looking in their direction and you're sending the message to the speaker that I'm paying attention to you. And the fact that you're going through that effort and you're making that effort to do it is very, very reinforcing to the other people.
Great. So how can you help blind children understand empathy and to be able to understand what others are interested in?
So this is, again, going back to my earlier point that when you have a disability, everybody else is so attentive to you that it'd be very easy for you not to pay attention to anybody else. And so this is something that we really encourage our parents and professionals to really take the time to work with our students on noticing what other people are doing and what other people are interested in. So an example I would give is, most children, when they're 4, 5, 6, 7 years old, will buy a present for their parents for, Mother's Day or Father's Day or birthdays, whatever. And the parent will usually take them and, and help them pick it out, and then they'll give it on the day. But one of the things that we say, if the child has a disability, and you really want to encourage them to have a sense of empathy for somebody else, is to really ask them, okay, you're still going to take them to buy the present, you're still going to help them, but, gee, what do you think Dad would like? What does Dad like to do on his days off? What are some of his favorite hobbies? And just getting that child to be thinking about somebody else and the cues that tell you, what does Mom do on her day off? What kind of music does I listen to? What does she wear? What perfume does she use? when she goes out, or those kinds of things. Like just paying attention to other people and expecting your child to notice the world around them and notice the people around them, and to start to think about, like, how can I respond to them? What can I do? That's going to make grandma happy, as opposed to what can grandma give me that's going to make me happy. Like those are it's just that kind of thinking. Again, it's a mindset. So helping them pay attention.
So how can underdeveloped or poor social skills affect a child's future, academically, in the workplace, in the community?
So the biggest concern is that you don't want to give the appearance that you're more disabled than you are. And disabled is even a funny word, but you get the idea that things are more significant. So the more that you can do to kind of ease that tension that other people have around your disability, the easier it's going to be for them to be with you, to work with you, to associate with you. So if they're uncomfortable, I say this a lot, that part of my job when I'm meeting new people who aren't used to me being around a blind person is I'm working very hard to make them comfortable. Because I know in the long run it's going to be better for me if they're comfortable, because then we can talk about the things that really matter, the work we're going to do, whatever it is that we're sharing. And so it really is important for you to do that. Again, going back to the example of autism, you don't want to have people think that you have an additional disability that you don't have. Again, there's nothing wrong with being autistic, but if that's not who you are, you don't want people thinking that's who you are. You don't want people responding to you that way. On top of that, here at Perkins, we have some students who are extremely, have numerous disabilities. So they might have a visual impairment, they might have a cognitive impairment, they might have a speech impairment, they may use a wheelchair, they may need PCAs, personal care assistants, to help them in the showers and the toilets. This is hard work. This is difficult work. And so you'd be shocked at how much a please or a thank you, or just the fact that you could wait sort of patiently for your turn. These things go a long way to make it so much easier, so much more pleasant for people to help you with these difficult, awkward situations. And so it really is important to be able to sort of put your best foot forward in those situations.
Great. And so, as a teacher, how do you help prepare students to use good social skills in the workplace and classroom?
So again, we do mock interviews when they're getting ready to go. From very early on in the secondary program here at Perkins, our students are rehearsing how to go on job interviews and how to greet one another and how to show common interests. We also have things like we have a radio station here. A radio station is a huge place for us to work on our social skills, because we have students who host shows. They have co-hosts, and they have to listen to each other, and they have to be able to respond to each other's comments and topics, and provide some additional information maybe, or share something with them. And so we have a chance with the radio station to talk about an audience. There's an audience out there listening. You don't know who they are, but you have to appeal to that audience. So how do you shape your conversation? What kind of language do you use? What does that audience need to know? And so all these things are things that we work on that are helping them do a radio show, but it's also helping them socially. We recently had a student who went on a job interview, right after we were sort of working on these skills on the radio, and it was amazing to us. We got a report back on how well he did, and so many of the things that he was doing in that job interview, transitioning from one topic to another, asking questions about the other person, the greetings, everything, that person interviewing them. And we were just amazed at how well he had done, and how much of the stuff that he had done we'd also worked on in radio. So again, it's not because he had radio that he was able to do these skills. It's that we reinforce them here. Great.
Can you talk about verbal and nonverbal social skills and how both of these affect blind children?
Sure. So the verbal, we talked about a little bit in terms of tone, working on, just using the right voice to meet the task at hand. And so we talk about like what you might say to your buddies on a Saturday night versus what you would say to your boss on a Tuesday morning. These kinds of situations. And we'll talk about how you have to shift the language, you have to shift the vocabulary, the kinds of things that you're gonna, the topics that you'll use. Public and private. This is a big one when you're blind is the fact that you don't necessarily know who's around, who might hear you. So you always have to kind of operate with the idea that you're in public unless you're absolutely sure that you're in a place where only you and your friends can hear each other. So that's something you have to be conscious of, because you don't want to be saying something with people around that you're not aware that they're hearing you. So those kinds of things. So we work on that. We work on proper tone. We work on proper volume. So you're not real loud, or you're not so, you're mumbling, right? So we have to work on that, because again, that sort of sends a message about where you are in the world and how interactive you're going to be. So that's important. Nonverbal, again, that goes back to the things that they don't see. So any opportunity you have, whether it, again, in a book or a movie, to talk about, the wave, talk about the wink, talk about those kinds of things, that's direct instruction. We just have to simply tell them this is what's going on. We can also like to do things like use family photos and things. So if your parents are, if you have pictures of your child, describe to them like, hey, this was your 6th birthday party, and boy, you have a big smile on your face. You look like, do you remember what was going on? Do you remember what you got for your things like that, so you can associate the picture, how they looked in the picture, with the emotion that they remember experiencing at that time.
Great. So who's involved with teaching children social skills?
Everybody. It starts at home because the home is the great laboratory. I was talking to my colleague here, Betsy Bixler, who said that her mother had this expression that she goes, I want my children to misbehave at home, because that's where I can teach them. So I have a chance. I can show them the right way. And let's face it, I think all of us, if you think back to it, we always behaved much better at our friends' parents' houses than we did with our parents. There's always that sense of like, uh-oh, I'm on my own here. I'm in somebody else's territory. I've got to really step up here. And so, opportunities to do that. I mean, those kinds of things are things that are really, really important. Again, going back to you as parents or as educators, make sure that your children have these situations. So you can talk to them about it at home and role play and teach, but then make sure that they have that they do get to go over friends' houses and for dinner, and that they do get to go independently places with friends, so they have an opportunity to work on these social skills. That's really, really important.
Okay. So how are professionals such as speech language pathologists, social workers, or occupational therapists involved in teaching social skills?
So again, the speech therapists do a lot with tone of voice, a lot with expression, a lot with matching the right language to the setting. So they're great on that kind of stuff. That's very important. Occupational therapists do things like just helping kids practice handshakes, things like that. I think that's physical, using their hands, those kinds of things, and teaching those kind of physical skills. Social workers very good at dealing with the emotional stuff. So at a place like Perkins, we all work together and we kind of reinforce with each other, like, these are the skills we're working on, these are the most important things. Let's make sure. But even in the public schools, I mean, you have access to those people. That's part of the IEP process, is to identify these skills as important, and then these people can help you address those issues and give you good information.
Right. So how do parents make sure that their children are getting social skills and training as part of their children's individualized education plan, their IEP?
So first of all, make sure it's in there. So remember that the IEP process starts with the educational needs of the student. It doesn't start with the setting. It doesn't start with where they are. It starts with, what does my child need? And so hopefully after this webinar today, hopefully you've already had this in your IEP, but if not, you're thinking about the fact that, that really is important. So raising those issues and making sure that in the IEP, it's very clearly stated that my child has to work on these issues. Don't sign the IEP unless those things are in there. People that might help you, there are national advocacy groups for parents. So there's something, there's NAPV, the National Association of Parents of the Visually Impaired. I'm sure in your local school districts and local states, there are parents groups. Talk to them and find out what's available, what resources are available. Understand what the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act is, IDEA. Understand what your child is entitled to. And again, my parents didn't know a blind person until I was born. That's probably the situation with most of you, listening to this webinar today. So the best thing you can do is to find other people who have been through it and talk to them and get information from them and network that way, because this is something that your sighted, that your peers with sighted children never had to deal with. And so they can be a great resource in other ways, but they may not be the best resource here. And so talk to parents who have actually been through this.
Great.
Very important.
So how can parents help reinforce social skills at home?
So again, paying attention to them and letting your child know, like, they're being inappropriate. I mean, that is the best. That is really the best teaching tool. Let them know that if they're looking miserable and they don't realize it, like, say, are you okay? Are you doing, oh yeah, I'm fine. Well, you don't look happy. But just giving them that sense of, like, the fact that their facial expression is sending a message to you. Don't be afraid to do that. Don't be afraid to make sure that they're responsible for getting a gift for a parent or a sibling. Make sure that they have chores to do, that they have responsibilities in the house just like everybody else. Make sure that they have opportunities to work on these social skills. This isn't so much about at home, but one of the things that I want to be clear about is that today in the public schools, a lot of our students have aides that go with them to their classes. And one of the things that I think a parent can do that's really, really important is to talk to the school and talk to the aides about what you don't want the aides to do. That you want to make sure that the aides can maybe step back a little bit and give your child or your student an opportunity to sit with friends and talk amongst themselves without you being there all the time. Because one of the things I say is, I learned some of my best social skills without adult supervision. And I think that's true for all of us. And just for an example, imagine trying to ask a girl out on a date if you've got an adult standing next to you, setting that up. It's going to be really awkward and really hard to do. So I think that just having it in your mind and saying, like, I'm going to expect the same thing from my blind child as I would from my sighted child when it comes to social skills. That's the most important thing you can do. And don't be afraid to let them know when they're being, inappropriate, because how else are we going to learn? Right? How else is somebody who's blind going to know if somebody tells them? And you're the parent, and you're the person in the best position to tell them.
Okay. How can parents teach their children about physical boundaries in private space?
Okay, so first of all, I want to go back to the handshake for 1 second, because the handshake is the proper distance for us to kind of conduct social business. So essentially, you put out your hand halfway, the other person puts out their hand halfway, you meet, and you're an arm's length apart. And that's the business model. That's the business stature. That's where we are. That's how we communicate. Anything closer to that is more intimate, right? The people that come in closer to your body are your close friends, your family, your lovers, those people, right? Anybody beyond the handshake are people that are, acquaintances or strangers, and so they're beyond that realm. So just having those concepts in mind. Also, a handshake is also a great way of gauging a person's height, and also a good way to kind of to make eye contact. You get a good sense of where they are in space, and it can help you kind of just kinesthetically figure out where they are. So those are things. There is a curriculum, the Circles curriculum from the Stansfield Company, that does this with concentric circles, brightly colored, that sort of show, like, the inner circle is family. And then the second circle is friends. The third circle is acquaintances. And then you can kind of put objects in around those circles. And now you can also do this tactily with raised lines, so you can feel the circles. We've even done it with hula hoops. So we had a very small hula hoop that kind of is just very close to the body, one that's a little bigger, and then one that's even bigger, and kind of who stands where. And then you can also talk about how does somebody go from being an acquaintance to a friend to a spouse? Or vice versa. So those things can happen. So that's a great tool. So something like that works very well.
Okay. What about sex education? When should you start talking to your child about sex, and what do you teach?
Never too early and never too late. So, and this is something, and I really should have said this at the beginning, but a lot of times when I do these presentations, and particularly around sex ed, I do a lot of work on sex ed, and hopefully someday you'll invite me back to do a webinar on sex ed, because it's a passion of mine at this point. Because it is so important, and because so much of, as a blind person, we rely on the people around us to describe things to us. And most of the time, people are very willing to do that. The one area where they're not is sex. Because first of all, people don't talk about sex. And if they do, they don't talk honestly about it. And so if you're blind, it's kind of a double whammy. It's going on, but nobody's talking about it, right? So you're really behind. And so it's very, very important that you take it very seriously. So start as early as you can. Start with simply giving the proper body parts, the proper names to body parts. So, you can also teach the child, when to use that, that you can give them a nickname. So it can be their PP, it can be that whatever, but also give them the real name so they can make some very early on, they understand that there is a technical and then there's a slang expression for these things. So talk to them about that. Give them, describe, when they're small, describe the way that, what you can wear inside the house. What parts of the body always get covered, what parts are optional, right? The great example we use is at the beach. Boys at the beach go topless, girls at most beaches don't, right? So that's just that just sends a powerful message about what is taboo and what's not taboo, right? So being able to describe those things to your child early on, is so important. Those are a few things, but that's, and again, it's never too late. The talk. I mean, you can ask people when did your parents, how old were you when your parents talked to you about sex? And, somebody might be 8, 10, somebody else might be 16, they never did, right? So it's never too early, it's never too late. Parents, when I do these presentations, often come up to me afterwards and they're like, oh my God, I've ruined my child. It's, they're 16 and I never, it's like, no, it's fine, just start now. You can always go back and do it.
Okay. What about bullying and other negative social interactions that children may experience at school or in the community?
Well, first and foremost, we went back to talking about being able to be sort of reading emotion and understanding how people are reacting. So first of all, being very clear that if it is bullying, if somebody is targeting you and repeatedly targeting you for your disability or your gender or anything else, to be able to recognize it and to be able to understand that that's not cool. They have technology today, so our students are on the internet like everybody else. So they're getting messages just like everybody else. They're doing Facebook just like everybody else. Now they can't necessarily see the pictures, but they get the text. So teaching them about that, just like anybody, we do that in health class, we do that in general classes, but talking about that. And then finally, self-advocacy. We don't want any child bullied. And so at some point, if they recognize it, they need to be able to report it to a trusted person and stand by it. So again, it's really not that different from sighted children.
Great. So how can parents help reinforce social skills when they're out and about in the community?
So a couple of simple things. Classic case, you go to the restaurant with your child and the waitress says, what's he going to have or what's she going to have, right? So you just simply turn and let your child speak for him or herself, right? To say, so that you send the message, and waiters and waitresses recognize this almost immediately. As soon as you do it, they're like, oh, of course that's what I'm supposed to do, right? And so something like that just sends a powerful message. Going sighted guide in a crowd. So typically what happens is, as the guide, you're the one that's always saying, excuse me, coming through, excuse me, coming through, right? Well, I always say, it's my job too to also say, excuse me and thank you. It's not just the person in front of me, right? I am also walking through that crowd. But it just, again, sends this message that I am responsible for my actions as well. So, it just gives you that sense of, equality there. Speaking up for yourself. If you, need directions, neither one of you know where you're going. It's perfectly okay to turn around and have your child say, excuse me, but can you tell me where this is? Anything where you're just giving them the opportunity to assert themselves, in the world is important.
Great. Well, thank you, Jeff. I'd like to open up the floor for everybody's questions, so feel free to type in your questions into the chat window or email me directly at laura.northridge@perkins.org. So let's see what we have here. Let's start with Lauren has a question. Lauren is a mom of a young deafblind child, VI and HOH, and she has a question about explicit social instruction. He is visually impaired and hard of hearing. He's 4. His social skills are delayed enough that he meets the qualifying criteria for an autistic child, but psychologists say he doesn't behave like a typically autistic child, so probably deaf-blind issues. Would explicit instruction through ABA therapy help him? Any thoughts on ABA, autistic behavioral adaptation for deaf-blind kids?
Yeah, I think, and I'm not the most up to date on this area, but I think the overarching message here is that you're trying to teach a social skill to someone that has limited access to those things in a way that's going to make them make them more socially appropriate. However you do that, to me, is fine. I think that because it's the end. The end is what you're really concerned about. Is can they respond more appropriately to a situation based on the training you gave them? And I think in this case, the diagnosis and we're always borrowing from other disciplines and from other areas, other disabilities. We're like, oh, that works for us too. I recently took a class on English language learners. Where we're now required in Massachusetts to have training in case we have a English language learner in our classroom. But so many of the things that I learned in that class, I'm like, oh my God, I'm going to use that next week with my students who are really, whose verbal skills are just emerging. So borrowing from anywhere where you feel like you're giving direct instruction that's going to help your child to be, more socially appropriate. Don't worry about where it comes from. Just look at if it makes sense and it works. That's what's important.
Great, thanks. We have a question from Kate from Massachusetts. Do you believe social skills can be learned at any age? And in what ways do strategies we use to enhance social skills change for older individuals?
Well, I think yes, I believe they can be learned at any age, and they change and they shift from age to age. I mean, I'm going to be 60 in July. If I tried to behave the way I behaved when I was 21, people would be wondering like if I was going through like my second childhood or something, right? There would be reaction to that. So yeah, I do believe that they're constantly changing, and I really should have said this even earlier. But I mean, I'm sure if all of you listening in the last week think back, there's probably a time when you missed something where maybe you were short with somebody when you didn't mean to be, but you're having a bad day, or there was an opportunity to greet somebody and you didn't put your hand out as quickly or something. We're constantly, social skills are constantly shifting and changing. Situations are moving. We're human beings, so our moods shift constantly. So there's no one size fits all. There's no perfect social skill situation. It's all very fluid. So yeah, I think that they absolutely change with age and background and situation. And to me, I guess the message I would give is, be true to yourself. I mean, don't try to use social skills to be somebody you're not. Try to use social skills to be yourself. So, if it's, I mean, I wouldn't try to use the slang that a lot of my students use because it just wouldn't sound right coming from me. And if I told them that they were looking pretty groovy, they'd think I was weird. So I mean, that's just the way it is. So.
Great. Thank you.
I think I know that, Kate, in Massachusetts, too, but I don't know.
Do we have any more questions from the audience? We can wait a few minutes to see. Please, if you have any other questions from Jeff, let us know.
Really, while we're waiting, just just the overriding thing for me is the concepts I want people to have: reciprocity, that idea of reciprocating, and the idea of balance, that you want your child to be balanced, that you want them to give and to receive. You want them to be able to give love, you want them to be able to get love. You want them to be able to do their job and to be appreciated for the job that they do. Those kinds of, so reciprocity, just keep reciprocity in mind. The narcissism of disability, the idea that, that we can actually train our kids to become narcissistic by simply overdoing for them and not expecting anything in return from them. It's as parents, that is how we feel. They're our child. We love them. We can't imagine anything more perfect. But the rest of the world doesn't see them that way, right? So that's really, really important. So just keep that concept in mind. Never too early, never too late. It's fluid. It's always happening. If you travel abroad, you might find all of a sudden that all of you are on, there's a whole different set of social skills that you're all going to have to learn together. That could even be a fun activity to talk about that. Like, what are we going to have to do differently in this country? Those kinds of things. I mean, it's constantly going on. Don't beat yourself up over anything that you may have missed along the way, because there's still time to, work on those things. Be honest with our students. I've always found that, I had teachers growing up who were really, really cool, and then I had teachers growing up who always, who I knew always had my best interest at heart. And then when I look back on it, I don't really remember a lot about the cool teachers. What I remember are the ones who really sat me down and said, listen, Jeff, most people make eye contact. You need to start making eye contact. Those conversations were some of the most meaningful conversations I've ever had. So
Great.
Just keep that in mind.
So we have a question from Philip. How would you recommend I promote an appropriately quick response, avoiding a lurch while people are waiting for a response from a student whose responses are often uncomfortably delayed or require multiple prompts?
I understand. I think I understand that question. We have students who are very delayed in terms of, you might ask them a question and it's going to take them a minute to, literally a minute to think it through and then respond to you. I'm not sure of the entire situation here, but I will tell you that for me, when I have a student like that, I have to keep saying to myself, my job in this moment is to wait him out. If I believe that he understands the question, and I believe that he has this delay and he has to process it, then I'm going to, I just have to remind myself not to lurch, as this person put it, not to jump in, just to wait. It's hard, but you just keep telling yourself, this is what I've got to do, this is what I've got to do, this is my job at this moment. Now, if there's other kids in the class and that becomes an issue, there's always the standard, I want you to think about that, and I'll come back to you in a minute. I'm going to ask John a question. And then make sure you go back. Make sure you follow up so that student knows that response is important. Because if you don't go back, eventually they're going to learn, oh, when the teacher asks me a question, I don't really have to respond because he's not going to care. So I hope that helps. I'm not.
Great. Shelley is asking, do you have any past webinars that can be found online that you've done?
I have one on addressing issues of sexuality with students who are visually impaired. It's on the Perkins website, and it's on YouTube. That's much more about sex. There's an article that was written that I know is online on social skills. I forget the title of it, but I'm in that article. But if you Google social skills, blindness, Perkins, I'm sure it'll come up. So those are some. I'm trying to think. There's a video. At Bridgewater State. I'm not sure how accessible it is, but they have a series at Bridgewater State of lecturers who talk about different disabilities, and I know there's a way of getting access to them. I'm not sure how easy it is, but also if you went to Bridgewater State in Massachusetts, I think there's a video there as well.
Great. Okay, we have one last question. How can I explain, this comes from Carmen, how can I explain that there are other kids with disabilities like Down syndrome and that they speak differently?
Well, I'll tell you what we do here. It's a very simple message, but it's that everybody's working on something. You know, so when our students would be like, why is Johnny always doing that? It's like, remember, everybody in this room, everybody here has got something they're working on. Not everybody does everything exactly the same way. So some people, they might be working on their speech. Somebody else might be working on their writing skills. Somebody else might be working on their, ability to respond in class, oral presentation. So just constantly reminding everybody that we all have things to work on. That's a good lesson for all of us in life, is that we all have our strengths, we all have our weaknesses, and this goes back to my point about being interdependent. That's what builds community, is the fact that we all do rely on each other, that we all have our strengths, we all have our differences, and together, if we do it properly, we all kind of offset each other, and we have a sort of a balanced community. And so, messages like that are the ones that we like to use most of all, just reinforcing those ideas.
Great. Well, thank you, Jeff, and thank you to everyone for joining us today. We'll be emailing you a link to the presentation, and the recording will be available on Perkins' website. Please join us in the fall for our final 2 installments in the Learning with Blindness series. In the meantime, you can catch up with any of the webinars that you may have missed at perkins.org. You can search for ECC webinar. That's Expanded Core Curriculum. If you have questions about your child's needs, feel free to reach out to our admissions team at admissions@perkins.org. If you have any questions or ideas for topics that you'd like us to cover, please feel free to email me at laura.northridge@perkins.org. I look forward to your ideas and your feedback. Have a great rest of your day.